And we are now live. Yoram Solomon, nice to have you here, man.
Good to be with you, Andrew.
Did I get the pronunciation right?
You got it perfect. I mean, you got
Nailed
it
it.
the way my wife gets it, and that's good enough for me.
Oh no. Okay. I have a feeling that I won't make any comments on that in case she's listening. So, well, cool. So, I guess just to kind of kick things off, do you want to just introduce yourself? Tell everyone what you're all about.
Yes, I'm Yoram Solomon. Thank you. It's well, let's see. Plano, Texas. Focus on trust, how to build trust, be trusted, know who to trust. And I'm sure that at some point you're going to ask me how I got there. Originally from Israel, after 34 years in service in the Israeli Defense Forces, last 10 years in the 35th Airborne, decided to move to the US for 2 years. That was 21 years ago. Moved to, obviously, California for 5 years, and then we moved to Texas and have been in Texas for the last, 18 years.
No kidding. No kidding. It sounds like you've had quite a shift in career then. How did you end up studying trust?
Well, it's 30 years ago, I was an engineer. So, dealt with software, hardware development most of the time. If you would have told me 30 years ago that 30 years later, I'm going to be talking about trust, I would think that you're crazy. But nevertheless, here we are. I started as an engineer. I started with innovation. I was, one day I came up with this idea that we can put some kind of a display in a car. And if we scan a map and we use accelerometers, we can actually tell the driver where he or she is. You're laughing because, it's called GPS. Well, this was before the US even sent the first GPS satellite up there. This is when I was 12. So had all kinds of weird ideas, and I realized I'm pretty innovative. And so throughout my career, I was always involved with innovation, mainly in the engineering side. But then one day I decided I'm going to start help companies be more innovative. So I started helping them be more innovative and come up with ideas. And one of the most frustrating things for me was that we came up with great ideas, whether it was a company that I worked for or a company that I helped as a consultant advisor. Great ideas, they never stick. Why don't they stick? That was just about the time that I had to work on my PhD doctoral dissertation, or at least come up with a topic. So this is in 2008. So I'll give you the story. You remember 2008. I mean, you being from New York, you remember you're around Wall Street, right? And so market crashed. I was working for Texas Instruments, and Texas Instruments had just announced that they're going to let go of 1,400 employees. They just didn't say who. So you can imagine what it is to work for the company at that time. I mean, you don't know if you're on the list or not, but you have the economic crash. You have Texas Instruments reduction in force. The biggest challenge I had to come up with a topic for my doctoral dissertation. So I did my doctoral in organization and management. And so I need to come up with a topic. Well, I'm on a call with my advisor, with my mentor. And I come up with ideas and he keeps shooting them down. I come up with new ideas, he keeps shooting them down. So just so that you know what they call a person that at the end of the doctoral journey, you have to defend your dissertation. Mm-hmm. Now, you know what they call someone who barely manages to defend their dissertation? Barely. I mean, really barely. You know what they call them? Doctor. So it really doesn't matter. It's binary. It's you get it or you don't. You defend it or you didn't. Then the other thing that you hear at the university is that a good dissertation is a done dissertation. And so I'm sorry, but I'm aiming pretty low with the topic. And Cordy, my mentor, keeps shooting down every idea that I come up with. He keeps shooting it down. And I get pretty frustrated, as you can imagine, until he asked me a pivotal question. This was one of the most pivotal questions I was asked in my life. he asked me, what pisses you off? And so I wanted to say, well, I'm trying to come up with a topic and you don't let me. But the words that came out of my mouth were, why are people so much more creative when they work for startups than when they work for large, mature companies? I worked for startups. I started startups. I sold startups. I bought startups. But at the time, as I said, I was working for Texas Instruments, a company that with 35,000 employees was anything but a startup. And so I wanted to know what makes people so much more creative when they work in startups than when they work in large, mature companies. There was quite on the other side of the line. And then he said, I think we have a topic. So I spent the next 2 years trying to understand why are people so much more creative when they work in startups than when they work in large, mature companies. I did my research all over the US, Canada, China, Europe, Israel, and I was done writing chapters 1, 2, and 3, presented it to my committee. They approved it, wrote chapter number 4, presented it to my committee. They approved it. I was done with chapter 5, which is the last one. Mm-hmm. Called Cordy, my mentor, Sunday night, and I said, "Listen, I'm done with chapter 5. I just finished writing it now." He said, "Email it to me." So I asked him, "Can you give me another week just to go over it, clean it up one last time?" He said, "Sure." Unfortunately, Cordy went to sleep Monday and did not wake up Tuesday, and I actually dedicated my dissertation to him. I dedicated it to him and his effort. I did graduate. My younger daughter came with me to my graduation. She was actually, both of them did come. My younger daughter, Shira, she was 9 at the time. So we went to the graduation. We came back home. Shira had a friend over for a play date. And her friend said, "Where did you come from?" And Shira said, "Oh, we just came back from my daddy's doctoral graduation ceremony." And so her friend asked her, "Really? So your daddy's a doctor?" And Shira thought about this for a second, and she said, "Yeah, but not the useful kind." So what I researched was, why are people more creative in startups than mature companies? But what I found was that it comes down to a culture of innovation. And a culture of innovation is, what I found out later, is based on the foundation of trust. And that's when I started researching trust.
Interesting. Wow. That's that makes a lot of sense, right? A mature company probably wants you to stay in between the buoys that they have laid out for you, whereas a startup is a little more innovative, a little more daring to experiment and find new ways to do things, versus the mature company just sticking with the tried and true.
Actually, that's kind of part of it. I boiled it down after writing a 348-page dissertation. I boiled it down to 3 components. 2 of them vertical, between a leader and a follower, mm-hmm. and 1 of them horizontal, between members of the same team. The vertical ones, if you're a leader, it's your willingness to give autonomy, freedom to your people. Not to freedom to decide what they're going to do, but a freedom to decide how they're going to do it.
Yeah.
Now, if you give that, and that's what I found, that those relationships are reciprocal. If you give autonomy, you know what you get in response? You get accountability. Your people are willing to try things. They're willing to take risks. They're willing to fail because they know that you're not going to make it the end of the world for them. By the way, what typically large companies do is, instead of giving autonomy, they give bureaucracy. When you get bureaucracy, you know what you do in response? CYA. I'm just going to do what I'm told to the letter. If I'm not sure about something, I'm going to ask. I'm not going to try. I'm not going to take risk. I'm going to ask. So give autonomy, you get accountability. Give bureaucracy, you get CYA. It gets even more interesting on the horizontal dimension, between people at the same level within the same team, because it's their ability to hold what I call a constructive disagreement with the other 2 alternatives: destructive disagreement, where everything is personal, emotional, and irrational,
Yeah.
or office politics, right? Where we have the meeting before the meeting after the meeting, just not the meeting during the meeting. But in startup companies, for the most part, it's your ability to hold a constructive disagreement. You're willing to be vulnerable. You're willing to provide direct, unfiltered feedback, and you're willing to receive feedback from people. And that's another story. So I wrote this. This was my 7th book at that time. It's called Culture Starts With You, Not Your Boss. And I wrote about those three components. I sent the book out to the editors. And while the editors were reviewing it, I met with a potential client. And I sat down with them and I asked about autonomy versus bureaucracy. Definitely bureaucracy. Accountability versus CYA. Definitely CYA. Constructive disagreement. Absolutely not. And as I start digging into that, what I realized was, I like to ask why. Why don't you give autonomy? Well, I don't trust them with autonomy. Okay. Well, why do employees are not accountable? Well, they don't trust management to have their back if they fail, to be willing to let them fail. Well, let's talk about constructive disagreement. Why aren't you willing to be vulnerable? Well, because I don't trust the other person with whatever I'm going to say. I don't want to ask stupid questions, suggest stupid ideas. Well, how about feedback? Why aren't you willing to give feedback? I don't trust how they're going to behave. Why aren't you receptive to feedback? I don't trust that they're coming with my best interest in mind. And I'm like hearing trust.
Yeah.
This thing comes down to trust. And so I started researching, and it's funny because that book was the first time I ever wrote about trust. But the thing is, I wrote a 6-page epilogue chapter about trust. I added it to the book after it came back from the editors. So if you get the book, Culture Starts With You, Not Your Boss, I can guarantee that all the typos and grammatical errors are in a 6-page span, that chapter that I added after we were done. But ever since then, I started learning more about it, doing my own research, working with companies. I wrote 7 more books since then, including the big one is The Book of Trust. And there are some derivatives and so on. So that's how I kind of got to trust.
Wow. Yeah, no, you're so right. I mean, thinking about relationships, just reflecting on this in real time, like, if you don't have trust in a relationship, you don't have anything. You don't have a functioning relationship, and that's whether it's a spousal relationship, a friendship, employer to employee, a teammate to teammate. Like, they're all based on trust. That makes a lot of sense as to why it led you back to that one thing. So maybe this is a good time to ask you, what does trust mean to you?
Well, interesting question. First of all, I want to touch on how important it is one last time.
Sure.
I did a survey, and I asked, I believe I had 363 responses, and I asked this question: what is the most important quality for you in other people? Now, first time I asked it, it was kind of open-ended, and so I got all the responses and categorized them and got down to the top 5. Then I sent out a survey that was multiple choices, but really there are only 5 of them. And
I'm sorry to interrupt you. I think you cut out for a second there. What was the question? The most important?
What is the most important quality for you in other people?
Okay.
And so I gave, first it was open-ended, then I gave 5 options based on the open-ended part of it. And the 5 options in number 5, you want to know what came in number 5? With 0.83%, 3 out of 363 people said that the most important quality for them in other people is good looks. Good looks.
Wow. I'm surprised that made it at all.
Number 5. But then I started going up. Willingness to take risk, willingness to try things, willingness to work hard, intelligence, and in number 1, with 61.2%, more than the next 4 combined, their trustworthiness. Their trustworthiness. So you asked me, what does trust mean to me? I created in the Book of Trust, I created 8 laws of trust. I actually didn't create them. I report them as I learned them, as I found that this is how trust behaves. And so First of all, I'm going to say there are people talking about trust. I'm not the only person talking about trust. Here is something that I do that is very unique. You know, when you take a personality assessment, assess yourself, most people think that you can assess your own trustworthiness. You cannot. The reason is because trust, and that's one of the most important things I'm going to say today, trust is relative. First of all, it is continuous. It's not binary. There is no I trust you or I don't trust you. I trust you to a certain level. You know, when I do a keynote, I ask people, I tell them, unfortunately, lots of times I go to a conference and I forget my wallet at home, or I drive, I forget my wallet at home. So I tell them, just raise your hand. How many of you are willing to lend me $20? Not give me, lend me $20. I promise as soon as I get home, I'm going to put $20 bill in an envelope, send it back, mail it back to you. How many of you are willing to lend me $20? Almost
You're the trust
everybody.
guy.
Yeah, it's you know, what's the worst thing that can happen, right? How about $100? Well, not everybody. How about 1,000? One day I was doing that. I had an audience of 500 people. I asked, how about 1,000? There's one hand still up there. And I'm like, okay, 2,000. She raised, I never met her before. Don't know who she is. 2,000. She raises her hand. And I'm like, whatever I do before I go home, I need to take her name and number, because whenever I need a loan of $2,000, I know who to call. Yeah. But so trust is continuous. It is also contextual. You know, it's you trust me to do something, not necessarily something else. So it's contextual. Once again, it's relative. So how can I assess my trustworthiness if I don't know what context you need to trust me at? Trust is personal. It is individual. So if you think about that, there is a certain level of trust between you and me, a different level of trust between me and my wife, a different level of trust between you and whoever. There are, every two people have different trusting relationship. Another example of this is I also teach in college at Southern Methodist University, SMU. And one day I see my daughters. So both my daughters, one of them just graduated from college. The other one is still in college. And one day I noticed that she is, so Shira, that's the 9-year-old. She's in halfway through college now. And one day I noticed that she's signing up to classes. And when she signs up to classes, she goes to a website called ratemyprofessors.com. Now, are you familiar with that, Andrew?
I sure am, man.
So I asked my daughter, do you think that I have a page? I mean, being a professor and all, do I have a page? And she says, let's check. We check, and I have a page. And I go and I look, and, you know, I find this review. I get 5 out of 5. Awesome. I'm awesome. And it says that this professor really cares about your success, and he's this and that, and you know, very practical, very actionable, and so on. Like, cool. I check the next one, 1 out of 5. 1 is the lowest, by the way. There is no 0. 1 out of 5. Awful. He is this and he's that, but he's an easy grader. At least that. They gave me that. But I'm looking at this, and this is anonymous. I'm looking at these 2 reviews. They were posted for the same course in the same semester. How can 2 people see you so differently? That's the thing. When we look at trust and we think that it's all universal, it's not all universal. There are certain things that are universal. For example, telling the truth. Andrew, would you ever trust somebody who intentionally and consistently not telling you the truth?
Not likely. The bad track record is not good.
So that's universal. But then on a personal level, you know, it is unfortunate, but the political divide that we have right now in our country, Republicans don't trust Democrats, Democrats don't trust Republicans. If I know that you're on the other side, there might be a trust issue. Procrastinators and non-procrastinators. What is it? Extroverts versus introverts, marketing people or business people versus engineers. There is no trust there, even though there is no right and wrong. So trust is relative. You know, the other thing is trust is asymmetrical too. How is that asymmetrical? I'm also a pilot. let me ask you a question. Do you trust me? So, let's say that you flew with me before and you saw that I take off and I land and I take off and I land. Do you trust me to land the plane? Do you trust me to fly you to your destination?
Yeah, it sounds like you have a track record. You're licensed. I'll take it. Let's go.
We're gonna go with yes. So, so you trust me to take you, but does that mean that does trust have to be symmetrical? Does that mean that I need to trust you to fly the plane? No. So all of that gets you to the point where, first of all, trust is relative. So I have 8 of those laws, but you asked me for a specific definition, so I'm going to give you my specific definition that I have for trust. Trust is your willingness to accept the possible negative consequences of giving control of something you have, over something you have, to another person or thing, expecting them to do their best to minimize the negative consequences. I know it's a mouthful, but if you think about it, every time you trust someone, why do you trust them? Because you are going to accept some kind of negative consequences because you let them do something. And you expect them to minimize those negative consequences. So think about it. Why do you take why do you take risk? Because there is a reward, right? So we're going to start with the reward. There is a certain reward that unfortunately you can't get there by yourself. You have to take some risk. The risk is an objective thing, but in your mind, you translate it into fear. Some people are more afraid, some people are less afraid than the same objective risk. Okay? Bungee cord. Did you ever do a bungee cord?
I haven't. I've gone skydiving, though.
You've gone skydiving. Okay. Well,
in case you can use that.
35th Airborne, so we got that in common. But there are certain things that you're not going to be willing to do, and I'm going to be willing to do because I'm not afraid of them as much as you are, even though the risk to us is the same. And vice versa. There are certain things that you're going to be willing to do, and I'm not, because you are less afraid than I am of the same objective risk. So we have the reward, we have the risk, we have the level of fear. In order for me to feel safe, I need to know that somebody can compensate for that risk. I need to trust somebody. That somebody can be another person. It can be myself. It can be God. And it can be other things, which is kind of an indirect to other people that I never met. How's that for a definition?
No, I like that. That makes a lot of sense. It's because you're asking somebody to do something, and if you trust them to do it, you are instead of doing it yourself, you're going to, in that contract, you are accepting that it may not work out and that they could have a negative consequence, right? But you're trusting them to do their best with it. I think that was an interesting caveat you put in there. Am I getting that right, or am I off?
Yeah. No, you're right on target. And again, this is when you start asking. So the $20. Okay, why would you lend me $20? What's the reward for you? Well, the reward for you is maybe that you helped me. Maybe that other people saw that you helped me. Sometimes we do things just so that other people will see. So that's your reward. What's the risk? The risk is $20. Objective, right? Objective, it's $20. Now, this is where, by the way, you get to the subjective part, because for some people, $20 is a lot of money. For other people, $20 is nothing. So the level of fear that you have of losing this $20, different people will look at it differently. And now it comes to you trusting me in order to feel safe that, the negative consequences, small or big as it might be, in order for it to be compensated so you'll feel safe, you need to decide if you trust me enough.
Interesting. I like this. So
I like this too.
Please, go ahead.
No, I'm saying I like this too.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you said I'll add this too. Gotcha. So I guess, I kind of touched on it earlier, saying that, the basis of all relationships is trust, right? You need to have trust in a relationship. Have you come across kind of why that is in your research?
Why the basic forever? It just first of all, in my research, I just correlated it statistically. Why are you willing to give autonomy? Well, the number one thing that you can correlate to is because I trust you. Why are you willing to be accountable? I apply this mostly to the workplace. Uh, Several times I was asked to take it outside and talk about one of the people that I interviewed for the Book of Trust is one of Israel's leading divorce attorney. Her name is Amy Bechor Boni, and she actually gave me stories, and every broken relationship that ended with divorce, which obviously she sees a lot of it, every time it ends with divorce, it's because of trust. It's because trust was not maintained. It could be over financials, which is one of the leading reasons. It could be because, do you trust me that I'm not dating somebody else over you, that I'm not having an affair, or everything just came down to trust. But I did not pursue that. I stayed with the organizational context, and it just, when you use the why serious, why are we not productive? Well, we're not productive because I'm being micromanaged by you. Well, why are you micromanaging me? Well, because you don't trust me that I will do my job, because if I don't do my job, I put your job at risk. You, my manager, I put your job at risk. And so, it's the same structure. It comes down to one thing and one thing only. You don't trust me.
It's the glue that holds everything together, right?
Yes. Oh, this is something else that's funny. That I start my conference, my workshops, my keynotes by asking about the glue that holds everything together, and it is. If you think about it, in an organization, we focus on two areas. When we want to improve an organization, we focus on two areas and we miss the third one. The two that we focus on, one of them is personal development. So personal development can be technical skills, can be soft skills, empathy and things like that. Trust is not a skill. Trust is a characteristic. And it is relative. So it's in the eyes of the beholder, of the person who you want to be trusted by. But so we focus on growing the individual. Then we focus on growing the organization. How do we grow the organization? Strategic planning, ideation, innovation workshops, and Six Sigma, and everything that will grow the organization. But what's missing is that glue that takes those individuals that you help grow professionally and personally, turn them into a team. So one of the things that I say typically is that trust is what takes a group of creative, productive, and effective individuals and turns them into a creative, productive, and effective company.
Interesting. Yeah.
All of your efforts to try and build strategies, and this is how this whole thing started for me, trying to help companies innovate. So we came up with ideas, but they never stuck. And the reason they never stuck was because there was no trust there to take it to the next step. Whether you don't trust your top management to do the right thing, they don't trust you with resources and time. That's where those ideas evaporate.
Yeah. So you work a lot with companies, right? Helping companies kind of leverage this and grow. But you said you start with individuals.
Right.
Correct?
So here's my perspective on this. Trust, there is no such thing as the level of trust in an organization. Not really. The level of trust in an organization is made of the individual trusting relationships between every two individuals in the organization that rely on one another. So
Your third principle of trust, right?
yeah, yeah. So the first thing is you can't build trust in the organization without building trust in individual relationships. So we start with that. The second thing is that building trust does not happen by me telling you what you must do to earn my trust. It starts by me earning your trust. So I always focus on, let's break it down. So we have the organization. The level of trust in the organization is not good enough. What do? We start breaking it down into individual relationships. Every two people that have a reliance relationship between them. So now in every relationship like this, I look at this relationship twice. A trusting B, B trusting A. Okay, I don't know. Maybe A relies on B, B does not rely on A. So I don't care about the second one. I care more about why does A not rely on B? But A would help me understand why they don't rely on B. B is the one who's going to have to do the work. So I developed this 7-step process that helps you identify, first of all, well, we start with identifying the relationship, but then it helps you identify what is it that you're doing that's bad, that's holding you back from being more trusted by the other person. So notice that I focus on the bad and not on the good. And there's a reason for that. There was a lot of research, including research from Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky, that came up with the prospect theory in 1979 and won the Nobel Prize for Economics in 2002. There is a ratio called the critical positivity ratio, or the Losada ratio, that from Barbara Fredrickson, that claimed if you ever Googled the number 2.9013, that's what's going to come up. And what she claims is that we respond 3 times stronger to negative things than to positive things. This is why, by the way, you are more likely, much more likely, maybe 3 times, maybe 2.9013 times more likely to post a negative review if you had a negative experience than to post a positive review if you had a positive experience. So
Sure.
if I want to be more trusted by you, should I try and do one more good thing or eliminate one bad thing? Eliminate one bad thing, because that has 3 times the impact on your trust in me than doing one more good thing. So in that process, I help people identify what is that the one bad thing that you do. And once we identify this, now the question is, what habit should you develop to counteract it? And then we develop the habit. I actually created a series of online courses with that. They're called trustedatwork.com. So again, mainly focused on the workspace, trustedatwork.com. And in those courses, I explain it, I give examples, and I take them through those 7 steps.
Interesting. Yeah, so it's almost like, being trustworthy should be the default, and the real issue is just the habit you have that's making you not trustworthy. That barrier. It's more about removing that barrier than it is adding something else, right?
Exactly. Yes.
Interesting. I like that. Cool. So I guess I was going to ask you kind of how you help organizations build trust, and ask you so you work with individuals then and help those individual relationships. Do you do anything on more of a whole company level, outside of working with just individuals on fostering those relationships?
Well, typically the way that I work with organizations, I mean, obviously this is an organizational interest. You rarely find an individual in the organization that would reach out to me and say, I want to be more trusted. One interesting thing, by the way, is the team size. I have my own podcast. I don't know if you noticed, and in case you haven't noticed, it's called The Trust Show. And to make it easy, you can find it at thetrustshow.com. But in that, I explained this process. And the first episode that I recorded, it's a brand new podcast. The first episode that I recorded, is called "Does Team Size Matter for Trust?" And it does. There was research that was done by Robin Dunbar. I think it was in the 1980s, maybe. He's a British anthropologist, and he did research on the size of our brain and correlated it to the size of our network, social network of people who you know and you can call friends, or people you can rely on. And as you shrink that size, you get people that you trust more and more and more and more. So Andrew, for example, take yourself. If you start thinking about how many people do you really, really, really trust? I mean, how many people do you trust with your life? There's a reason why a SEAL team has 4 or 5 members. There's a reason why every special forces team has that size, that number of members, and not more, because you're limited. Somebody suggested a question for me. I'm not sure that I'm going to use that, but it's how many people can you trust to help you hide the body? So can you count that on more than one on one hand? You probably can only count it on one hand.
Sure.
And the reason that there are several reasons for that. One of them is that think about this. You're part of having a constructive disagreement, arguing in a very passionate but productive way. What happens? I mean, you need to be vulnerable. You need to be willing to ask stupid questions, suggest stupid ideas, really be vulnerable. What happens if, let's take, you have 4 members of the team, you trust all of them with your life? What level of vulnerability do you think you're going to have with them? Highest possible, right? I mean, you trust them with your life. Add 1 more member to that team. That member you don't trust. How vulnerable are you willing to be with the entire team now? The level of vulnerability is dictated by the least level of trust that you have in the organization. So what do? First of all, try to understand the organization, how the organization is connected. I have a tool that I developed. It's an online tool that I call Trust Tracker 360. And in that tool, first of all, you identify the level of reliance that every member of the team has on another one. Again, this is important because if I don't rely on you for the deliverable of the team, the outcome of the team, doesn't matter how much I trust you. I don't need to rely on you. So I try to identify the reliance relationship. Who depends on who relies on who. Then in every one of those relationships, we break it down into what's the level of trust between those 2 members, and then work with call it the trustee versus the trustor, the person that needs to be trusted. Identify that one bad thing, let's replace it with one good thing. So even though I say that I work with every one of them individually, typically the way we do that is we do that through my online courses that complement kicking it off as a company. So, take next week, I have 3 different companies that I'm doing that with, where we're going to start with this kickoff, a 3-hour workshop to explain the entire concept. Then we're going to go off to the assessments, to the team assessments, the Trust Tracker 360, and then each one of them will be working on their own trustworthiness habit.
Gotcha. That makes sense. So it's more about those teams and how they trust each other than it is like overall company policy and that kind of thing.
You do not fix trust with a policy.
Yes. Yes, 100%. That's why when I read
you shall be trusting each other between 9 a.m. and 5 p.m. And after 5 p.m., the level of trust may decrease from 100% to 83%.
Or else.
Or else, yes. Because that's going to work.
Yeah. Oh, you might trust the organization on their or else threat, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. When I saw your 8 laws of trust and I saw the personal one, I was like, that resonated with me. That makes a lot of sense. So, question for you: what what I guess commonly referenced advice or maxim about trust do you hear that you disagree with or is wrong? Well, what's a example of some bad advice about trust that you commonly hear?
Well, the first thing is really the approach that trust is universal. That there are certain things that if you do them, you will be trusted. If you don't do them, you will not be trusted, and that's not true. There are, I'm sorry, there are a few universal things, but for the most part, every relationship has its unique characteristics, and trust can be built between people that other people will never trust. So trust is not universal; it is relative, and so that's one of the biggest things. Whenever I see somebody coming up with a trustworthiness assessment, I cringe because there is no such thing. I mean, this is not like a Myers-Briggs where you're going to tell me if I'm an extrovert or an introvert, because I'm going to tell you if I'm an extrovert or introvert by answering 7 questions, right? I can't tell you what I do to be trusted by you, not until I know what are the values that we have. I call it the personality compatibility that we have.
Mm.
So that's one of the biggest things. The other thing is that when if you take Myers-Briggs, for example, I took Myers-Briggs 3 times in my life. I think over the span of maybe 20 years. 3 times the results came back exactly the same. I did DISC several times. Results came back exactly the same. Can't say the same thing about trustworthiness for 2 reasons. One, it's because the way you trust me is not the same way as somebody else trusts me. It's relative. The second one is that trust, unlike the other characteristics, changes over time because trust is dynamic. So, for example, if you think about that, let's say that we met today. At the end of this, you're going to say to yourself, you know what? I think I can trust Yoram to be a good guest in the future. Okay, why? Yoram has good background, good setting, good sound, good camera.
Nice shirt.
A great shirt, color chosen by Shira, my daughter. There was no way I would ever choose purple as a shirt, but as a color for a shirt. But Yoram showed up on time and he answered all the questions. He had all the background material that I can trust Yoram as a guest. That's today. A year from now, you're starting to look at your list of people that you interviewed in the past, thinking of, I can't find any new guests. I need to get some of the guests in the past. You come across my name. You don't trust me the same level as you did at the end of the call today. You know why? Because a year has passed. This is a self-defense mechanism that you have that prevents you from keeping the same level of trust with a person you haven't seen in a long time. Trust is dynamic. It changes.
It's like a recency bias, right? Or something like that.
There is an element of that. That's kind of your self-defense mechanism. By the way, you want a trick? You want a tip?
Absolutely.
Yes, definitely. Okay, so here's the tip. When you communicate with someone in person, number one, in person, highest level of intimacy, we communicate over email. We communicate all the time over email. I'll tell you a story. I was running a $100 million business unit in Texas Instruments, and one of my peers came to me and said, you know what? You keep communicating with your people over email. Well, it's easy. It's comfortable. They're all in the same building, but it's easy and comfortable to communicate with email. I don't need to leave my office. Well, as it turns out, email messages or textual messages in general are a lot easier to misinterpret, and you fill the gap in what's missing, so you can misinterpret what's there, and you build assumptions into what's not there. Okay. Mm-hmm. Well, his advice to me was get your butt out of your office. And so I started going and seeing people in person. Well, that does several things. The level of intimacy being in person means that you can see my body language. And have you heard of Albert Mehrabian and the 738-55 rule?
I have not. No.
Okay, say yes. Of course, I did. Yes. So this
Yes,
is yeah,
certainly.
this is one of the most misquoted rules in history. So Albert Mehrabian, I believe is from UCLA, he did research in the late 60s and published it in a book called Silent Messages in 1971. And in that book, what people said or claimed that he said, which is not exactly true, is that communication is conveyed 7% through the tone, through the words, 38% through the tone of voice, 55% through body language. That's not what he said. He said that you like other people, you have feelings for other people, 7% based on the words that they use, 38% based on their tone of voice, 55% based on their body language. Now, I looked at his research, and I can argue with that research and how he reached those numbers. I mean, once you hear the number 7, 38, 55, it makes sense, and it grabs you because those are numbers, pretty precise numbers. I can argue with his research, but in the foreword to the book, he wrote a very powerful statement. He said that when your body language, when your verbal and nonverbal communications are not consistent, people distrust you. So this is so powerful. If I come to you face to face, even what we're doing now, you can still see my face. Maybe you can see the rest of my body language, but most of our emotions are conveyed through your facial expression. So you can see my facial expression. By the way, this is one of the reasons why I'm looking at the camera and not looking at where you are on the screen right now. This gives you a better insight to the consistency of what I'm saying and my body language and my nonverbal communication. Because you can feel that consistency, you trust me. So when I go and I visit with people, and they can see that my body language, my nonverbal communication and verbal communication are consistent, they trust me. They trust me much faster than if I communicate with them over email.
That makes a lot of sense. You hear about things getting misconstrued over text and email all the time. And as much as it is efficient, you lose a lot with it. And just honestly, even doing this podcast, when I first started it, I was like, I'm only doing it in person. I like doing it in person. You have somebody in the same room. It's just a richer conversation. Get more out of the communication. But obviously, with the internet, there are benefits. Like, I would have been much harder to get you here to do this podcast than us being able to jump on this. So, there, of course, are benefits. But no, it makes sense. Like, the communication is just a lot richer when it's in person.
Yeah.
So I can see why it leads to more trust. Interesting. Cool. Yoram, how would you say all of your research on trust has most impacted your life personally?
One, I realized that I cannot be trusted.
By who?
No, it's funny how when you have this level of deep understanding of a certain aspect of life, and again, this is an aspect of life. It's an aspect of my personal life, my relationships with my wife, with my daughters, with my friends. It's my relationships with my customers. It's a relationship with the vendors and so on. You become more aware, more self-aware of what you do. Now, there's something that when I do the workshop and I explain to people how to become more trustworthy so that they can become more trusted, then I tell them very specifically, I don't want you to use this to trick people to trust you, because this would be a one-time thing. The truth will finally come out and you will be anything but trusted. I mean, this would cause a deep hole in your trustworthiness. But it helped me understand how, if I need to be trusted by someone, what is it that I need to do? What is it that I need to focus on? What is it that I'm doing? If I feel that somebody doesn't trust me, I'm a lot more self-aware of what I can do. And, I end up advising a lot of my friends and family, you feel that this other person doesn't trust you. Let me tell you what is it that you do that causes this, and work on that.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. It's a powerful tool, like kind of like you were saying, if you misuse it, it's not going to end well for you.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Um, Kind of to shift gears here, can you take us through how you got the opportunity to do a TED Talk?
How did I get the opportunity to do the TED Talk? So it's actually kind of funny because my TED Talk is not directly related to it. I wrote a book in early 2018 called Cause of Death: Political Correctness. How PC kills creativity, productivity, and children. I collaborated with Lori Van. She is a psychology for non-suicidal self-injuries and suicide in teenagers. And we talked about that, and we found a lot of common language and what is it that we do with political correctness. And so I started writing it down, and this is how that book came out. Well, at that time, there was a new TED Talk that was about a new TEDx event that was about to be created. And they reached out to someone. I was okay. I'll take a step back. Back in 2014, I went through a program called Leadership Plano. It's a leadership program within the city of Plano, Texas. And we needed to come up with a project, and we decided that our project is going to be to put together the first TEDx Plano. And so we created TEDx Plano in 2014, and it has been going around for the last, 8 years. So it's been going on every year. And that first one, I was actually the host. So I was on stage introducing the speakers and buying time and so on. And we handed it over to the city of Plano. Well, I could not get to speak at TEDx Plano because I was also an elected official. So in 2015, I got elected to the Plano Independent School District Board, and I served on the board for 4 years. So Plano did not want to have me on TEDx Plano because, they don't want to get elected officials some kind of privilege. So another event was about to start in Dallas, and they reached out to Plano to get advice. And Plano said, we have a speaker for you that can't speak here because he's an elected official. So they reached out to me and said, you know what, can you fill all the forms, the application forms, the standard application forms? I said, look, I can. I have several topics, so let's talk over the phone and just to kind of get a sense of which one of the topics would you be most interested in. So we got on the phone. This would be the best advice I can give you. And again, this goes back into the intimacy of the communication. So we get on the phone, and I said, look, I can do a TED Talk about the worst diet ever. So an interesting method that I developed back in 2012 on how I lost 32 pounds. Very interesting, and it is based on motivation. How do you find the motivation to that? So at some point, if you would like, you can interview me, and I'll tell you the story of worst diet ever. But so I told him that, and I can talk about trust and this, and again, the book Cause of Death: Political Correctness was just about to come out, and I asked him. There is something interesting that in my research I just found. What if I told you? First of all, I don't know that you knew that, Andrew, but the U.S. can lead the world in a lot of things. I mean, we lead the world in the size of our military. We lead the world in, but here's one thing you don't want to lead the world in. We lead the world in the percentage of our GDP that we spend on civil litigation. 1.7%. 1.7% of our GDP goes to civil litigation. And just to put it in perspective, take Canada, the United Kingdom, the entire European Union, and Japan combined twice. That's how much we spend on civil litigation. 80% of the world lawyers live here in the US. 1 in 240 people. By the way, 1 in 13 in Washington, D.C. Just saying.
Whoa.
but 1 in 13, and I'm talking all ages. So, the 13 include retired people and they include babies and kids in school, and 1 in 13 is a lawyer. So
Wow.
I
Jeez.
started researching, and I found something really, really interesting. So, this is kind of why this and why that and why that.
Yeah.
And I asked him a simple question. If I told you that the reason we have so many lawyers here, and as a result, we have the level of civil litigation that we have, and I claim that as a result, the level of political correctness that we have, because we're so afraid of getting sued.
Right.
What if I told you that we have that level, that number of lawyers in the US because of one event that happened one night 50 years ago? He goes, "Are you serious?" I said, "Yes." And it's in the book. What is it? So I started taking him backwards.
Hmm.
We have this and that many lawyers, and what happened, and what happened, and what happened. Then I went from the other side and I closed the loop. We have more lawyers than any other country in the world because of one event that happened 50 years ago, one night.
That's wild.
Did you see the TED Talk?
I did. I didn't. Do you wanna explain
No,
for
no,
those who
no.
haven't
I'm
seen
not.
it?
Let the
Oh,
viewers, the viewers, go and check TED. It's actually my TED Talk ended up being on the TED website, TED.com. Not just a TEDx
oh,
YouTube, it's on
really?
TED.com. So if you go to TED.com, you look up Yoram Solomon, you're going to find a TED Talk called "The Day That Forever Changed America's Culture." And there it is. 15 minutes and 11 seconds later, you're going to know what that event is.
Deal. I did watch it. I could not believe the connection you drew. It was incredible. So maybe we can leave people on a cliffhanger with that.
Yeah.
Before we close out, is there anything you wanted to mention about trust that we didn't get to?
I'll just tell you what I typically say at the end.
Please.
At the end of a keynote, when I give a keynote, the answer to these two questions will have the biggest impact on your personal and professional success or failure. Can I trust you? And can you trust me? That's the biggest impact on your life.
Great questions to leave on. I love it. Yoram, thank you so much for being here, man. This was a great conversation. I took a lot away from it, and I'm gonna have to go back and listen again to to get it all.
Thanks for having me, Andrew.
Absolutely.